pioneer of artificial intelligence for decades, Google is playing a leading role in the race for generative AI. American Jon ORWANT, Senior Engineering Director at Google, is one of the key thinkers behind AI for the Californian giant. Please give him a warm welcome.
Hello, everyone. So we're going to talk English first roundtable. I hope it's okay for everybody. I'm very happy to have Jon ORWANT. Hi, Jon. At Google, so as you know, Google is one of the top 4 AI company, and maybe not even the 4th, maybe more toward the 2nd, playing a leading role in the research. But today we have Jon, who's doing the link between this research, this excellence research, and concrete application. Would you mind explaining a bit what you do at Google?
Sure, happy to. So first, my thanks to La Tribune for inviting me to what so far has been a very interesting couple of days. So my name is Jon ORWANT. I'm an engineering director in Google AI. I've been at Google for most of its existence, nearly 20 years. I've managed machine learning teams, search teams, visualization teams, and the reason that I'm here today is that I lead an organization called Operations Research, which is kind of, it's AI, but it's old school AI. We are kind of Google's experts in scheduling and routing and planning. So we route all of the street view cars as we try to drive cars down every road in the world as often as we can. We schedule all of the programs that are inside our data centers. We do planning for electrical grids, which is kind of ironic. A couple talks earlier, we heard Cedric Vianney talk about the implications of the immense electrical needs of generative AI. So what I'm doing, to be clear, is using AI to make energy cheaper so that we can use it for more AI. But my organization, I'm very proud to say, given the venue, is mostly based in Paris. And the reason for that is that while the United States, I'm American, is very business friendly, France is very math friendly. And a lot of the interesting developments that have happened over the past few years are because of math.
That's very interesting. Before talking, going into depths of what you do day to day, we wanted to have you talk a bit about the product integration at Google. We know that Google does Gemini, the model, but also you have Gemini in the workplace, now you have Gemini in the pixels, you have AI overviews also coming to revolutionize the search. How is that transition going? What are the challenges of doing this?
Yeah, there are so many Geminis, aren't there? So when you think about kind of the product life cycle of AI, it's important to ask, what sort of AI are you talking about, right? Because there's generative AI, and that's what everyone is talking about right now, but there's also kind of classic AI or the other AI. You could call it discriminative AI. And the reason I want to make this distinction is that the way you integrate AI into products is very, very different, right? So the year is 2024. 20 years ago, April 1st, people thought it was an April Fool's joke. We released Gmail into the world. Before then, everyone was using email, but it was on their local computer. If their computer died, they lost their email, and so this was the first email in the cloud. So what does it mean to have AI in an email client? There are a couple things it can mean, right? If we're thinking about generative AI, that could take the form of, a bot that watches you write and makes suggestions. Or if you want to write in a different language, it could do that. But also there's AI that's been inside Gmail since 2006, 2007 for spam filtering, but that's discriminative AI. So if you're starting, I'm kind of annoyed by how many people are looking at the success of ChatGPT, of Gemini, name your favorite technology, and then asking, what is my company's AI strategy? Because I don't think that's the right way to think about it. You should be thinking about products and thinking about people. And if you think about an experience that you want to have, then you want to think about how to get there. And maybe it involves AI, and maybe it doesn't. Whereas with generative AI, there's such a rush to figure out what to do with it. But you don't start with the product and work backwards. With the generative AI, you say, all right, well, what data do I have and what can I do with it when I build these models?
Yeah, we have this expression in France, say we put a bandage and it's kind of like, oh, we're going to put generative AI, it's going to work. So,
totally.
So I know you work with companies to implement AI and also generative AI, so projects. So as you tell me, it's kind of like layers. It's not necessarily if I understood you well, generative AI is just one other layer of a whole project, right? What company need right now to implement correctly AI? What are the ingredients they need to have?
So I think if a company is trying to figure out, what to do with generative AI, the first thing you want to do is to look at what data you as a company have that you uniquely have, because every company has data that is unique to them. It could be information about suppliers, it could be maintenance records, it could be records of customer feedback, it could be sales data, it could be internal data about how the company operates. And so you want to look at that and figure out, if you did have a person, a being, an infinitely intelligent being. I feel like we've heard phrases like that a lot today. You have an infinitely intelligent being, and they looked at all that data. What could they do with it? What patterns would they identify that no one else could? And then that tells you what sort of model you have to build. There's still going to be like a lot of testing, instilling of guardrails to make sure that the system you build doesn't end up hallucinating in a bad way. I say hallucinating in a bad way because there can be hallucinating in a good way. And with generative AI, it's impossible to reduce that level to zero.
Yeah. So you're going to look at this data, and then what competencies people need, or like when you work with companies, what are the articulation? Like, do people actually need some sort of skill set to welcome these projects, or you can bring it all?
The really happy thing I'm able to say is that it's not that exotic a skill set, and it doesn't have to be that expensive. So let me contrast what the big companies, Meta and Google and OpenAI, what they're doing. They are building large foundation models. That requires a tremendous amount of computational power. It requires a tremendous amount of data. It's why the previous panel that we were listening to, right, they were talking about the valuations of these companies. And if you are trying to create a model that has, all the text in the world, or even worse, if it's multimodal, it includes text and audio and speech and video, that's expensive. But if you're a company and you're not, in big tech, let big tech do its thing. Let small tech do its thing and see what you can do with these small models. Instead, focus on what are called task-specific models as opposed to foundation models, right? So, an example of this is, let's say you're a bank, all right? And you look at generative AI, you look at the quality of the chatbots out there, you say, all right, we want to do our own chatbot that answers questions from consumers, right? You can license a chatbot right now, and it will have a lot of generic banking information. Someone might say, oh, I want to increase my savings rate. And then the answer would be, well, you could use certificates of deposit. What you really want is that chatbot to say, and here's what our rates are, right? So that notion of the blending of these generic foundation models that are very expensive to produce, you blend them with something that is specific to the company, that has a smaller amount of data, is cheaper to train, and can be updated much more frequently with every change in the interest rates for that hypothetical bank. So this is called a RAG, or retrieval augmented generation.
And so you mentioned data. Would you recommend to companies to start structuring their data, start building their data, or because we know there was the previous way of AI, everybody started talking about data lakes, everybody's starting to talk about this. Are companies ready for that move?
Are companies ready for that? That is a very hard question to answer. Mm-hmm. I think, as I've given advice to companies, sometimes it's relatively straightforward of start keeping track of everything, right? So I was talking to CMA CGM, and they were wondering, as they train their employees to work on logistics, to work on shipping, is there a way in which they could accelerate that process? Because right now it takes 2 months to train. And they hypothesized that if only they had a bot of some sort that was able to amalgamate all of the knowledge of the experienced trainers, they'd be able to shorten that from 2 months to two weeks. Who knows what it would be? And so, but then, my advice to them was very, very simple. It was not technologically deep. It was start recording your training sessions. And so that's the way companies should be thinking. Record everything that you can.
Create data when there's none, and organize data when there's some, right?
Exactly.
You mentioned a bit this partnership with CMA CGM. It's also one of the reasons you're coming to Marseille. Can you tell us a bit about this? I guess it's unprecedented partnership at the Google scale. Would you mind telling us a bit the details of it.
Sure, happy to. So like I said at the outset, my team specializes in scheduling, planning, and routing. And for most of the history of my organization, we've looked at optimizing Google. And several years ago, I said, all right, well, we've developed some good technology. Let's start optimizing the rest of the world. And two companies that I like talking about, CMA CGM, Lufthansa. With CMA CGM, we haven't really done anything yet. We've kind of just begun working with them. But the problem that we're going to be working on is optimizing their shipping network. So every large ocean carrier has environmental regulations that they want to be able to meet, but they want to be able to meet them in cost-effective ways. So figuring out which vessels to assign to which routes is the first problem we're going to work on. And then once we solve that, we're going to work on a more dynamic model of figuring out what the shipping network should be. And I can talk about Lufthansa if you want.
Yeah, I mean, either of them, but how does AI, what you used to do, as you said, like the precedent work of Google and all this expertise you built over time, and Gen AI articulate, like what new lock are you going to open with Gen AI when it comes to those more industrial problems?
So how do
you articulate these previous methods of AI that you mentioned and Gen AI coming into this? What is it going to change to those very logistics problems?
Yeah, it's a nuanced answer I think I have to give, because one way of working is to say all right, I have a hammer and I'm going to go around and look around for nails, right? And Gen AI can be one hammer, but recurrent neural nets can be another hammer, and machine translation can be another hammer. I mean, what I try to do is, when I talk to companies, to just understand what their real problems are, and then from that try to articulate what the solution is. And if it can be Gen AI, then that makes a lot of people happy, but that's not always the right solution.
Yeah, not always, especially when it comes. So what kind of AI do you use then? What is still relevant? Because we talked the whole day about Gen AI. What are the most relevant old AIs that we are using?
Old AI, yeah. I guess I'll give two answers, right? So kind of the classic AI before the whole Gen AI revolution, it's mostly about deep learning, reinforcement learning, right? I mean, if you look at we heard earlier today about DeepMind and IBM kind of solving Go and chess, and that was kind of classic AI, right? Things like deep learning and reinforcement learning, but kind of architected together in a way that targets the structure of the problem. And maybe that's like a good way to think about it, right? If you have a problem you want to solve, think about what the structure of that problem is. The less you know about the structure, the more it just seems incredibly complicated, the more that argues for a technique like generative AI or deep learning. In contrast, if you're trying to build a system to add two numbers, right? You can train a neural net to do that. You can train a Gen AI system to add numbers, but it's silly. We know how to add numbers. And there are lots of problems in between that call for kind of specialized algorithms. And that's what, Google does everything, but like my organization focuses on those problems with, that particular type of structure, and things like schedule recovery for airlines or network design for shipping fits into that middle category.
So it's both a very specific vertical competency and an AI, very particular AI competency, right?
Exactly.
Your team are directly working with those companies, if I'm right? And what are what we say is the most valuable profile within your team when it comes to those? Like, what can't company reproduce on their own?
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I think the most important characteristic of people on my team is just like curiosity and insatiable desire to learn about new areas. But then as people kind of go and work with these companies, there are kind of like two ways to do software engineering. One is to do a generic software library, right? And say, all right, we've done something generic, bam, there you go, world, see what you can do with it. And the other is kind of wallowing in the details. And that's what my team does, is we go in and we learn about all the little intricacies of shipping or of aviation. And only when we do that can we figure out the right way to attack those problems.
All right. And maybe to end up this conversation, what are you expecting from the future in AI for this very particular field of optimizing routes and all such?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to make the world more efficient. Where I get really excited is, where I see the potential for kind of AI to really change the game, right? So for software engineering, for instance, increasingly, we're seeing programs that are written by other programs. And so then people, the engineers, are able to take a step back and amplify themselves, through the artificial intelligence that's there. And I think we'll see the same thing in different industries, but it'll affect different industries in different ways. So a question for, ocean shipping. Right now we have this notion of a service line, right? There'll be a rotation of vessels that'll go between, the North America and Southeast Asia. But maybe AI will enable us to have a more dynamic approach that will lead to, people getting their goods quicker. We just don't know, and I can't wait to find out.
All right. That's a good way to end. Thank you so much, Jon.
All right. Thank you for having me.